What happens when a simple morning interview turns into the most shocking television moment of the year? It only took 38 seconds for one guest to completely destroy her own reputation on live television. This is the story of when Meghan Markle walked onto the Good Morning Britain set and absolutely lost control in front of millions of viewers. The morning started like any other morning at the Good Morning Britain studio. The cameras were ready. The lights were bright. Susanna Reid sat in her chair, preparing for what she thought would be a straightforward interview. She had her notes in front of her. She had her questions prepared. She was professional, calm, and ready to have a respectful conversation. When Meghan walked onto the set, something felt different. The energy in the room changed. You could see it in the way she carried herself. There was tension in her shoulders. Her smile looked forced. Susanna greeted her warmly, welcomed her to the show, and thanked her for coming on. But Meghan barely responded. She just sat down and stared at Susanna with this look of pure disdain. Susanna started with an easy question, something simple to warm up the conversation. She said, quote, "We are so happy to have you here this morning. Can you tell our viewers what brings you to the show today?" End quote. It was a soft question, the kind of question every interviewer asked to start things off on a positive note. But Meghan did not want to play along. Meghan looked directly into the camera and said, quote, "I'm here because I have something important to say, and I refuse to let anyone silence me anymore." End quote. Susanna nodded politely and said, quote, "Of course, we want to hear what you have to say. That is why we invited you here." End quote. She was trying to keep things calm and professional, but Meghan was already getting defensive. Then Susanna asked another question. She said, quote, "There has been a lot of discussion about your recent public statements. Some people feel that you have been unfairly treated, while others believe you have not been entirely forthcoming. What would you say to those who question your version of events?" End quote. It was a fair question, a balanced question, the kind of question any journalist would ask. Meghan's face changed. Her eyes got narrow. Her jaw got tight. She leaned forward in her chair and said, quote, "Are you seriously questioning me right now? Are you seriously sitting there and suggesting that I am lying?" End quote. Susanna looked confused. She said, quote, "No, I am simply asking you to address the different perspectives that exist. That is what journalism is about." End quote. But Meghan was not having it. She raised her voice and said, quote, "This is exactly what I am talking about. This is the kind of treatment I've been dealing with for years. You sit there in your comfortable chair with your comfortable life, and you dare to question me?" End quote. The studio went quiet. The crew did not know what to do. Susanna kept her composure and said, quote, "I understand this is a sensitive topic for you, but I am just doing my job as a journalist." End quote. Meghan stood up from her chair. She pointed at Susanna and said, quote, "Your job? Your job is to attack people like me. Your job is to tear down women who speak their truth. You are part of the problem." End quote. Susanna remained calm. She did not raise her voice. She did not get defensive. She simply said, quote, "I've been doing this job for many years, and I've interviewed thousands of people. I treat everyone with respect, and I ask everyone tough questions. That is what good journalism requires." End quote. But Meghan was spiraling. She started pacing behind her chair. She said, quote, "You do not know what it is like. You do not know what I've been through. You sit here in your little studio and you judge people without knowing anything about their lives." End quote. Susanna took a deep breath and said, quote, "You are absolutely right. I do not know exactly what you have experienced. That is why I'm asking you to share your perspective. But I also have to ask questions that reflect what others are saying. That is my responsibility to our viewers." End quote. Meghan laughed. It was not a happy laugh. It was bitter and angry. She said, quote, "Your viewers? Your viewers do not care about the truth. They just want drama. They just want to see me fail, and you are giving them exactly what they want." End quote. Susanna shook her head and said, quote, "That is not true at all. Our viewers are intelligent people who want to hear different perspectives and make up their own minds." End quote. Then Meghan said something that shocked everyone in the studio. She looked directly at Susanna and said, quote, "You know what? You are just jealous. You are jealous because I actually matter. I actually have influence. I actually make a difference in this world. And you are just a newsreader. You read words off a teleprompter. Anyone could do your job." End quote. The entire studio gasped. You could hear people whispering. The camera operators looked at each other in shock. Susanna sat there completely still. She did not react. She did not get angry. She just looked at Meghan with this expression of complete disbelief, After a moment of silence, Susanna said very calmly, quote, "I am sorry you feel that way. I invited you here to have a respectful conversation, and I have tried to be fair and professional. If you feel unable to continue this interview in a civil manner, then perhaps we should end it here." End quote. Meghan threw her hands up in the air and said, quote, "Oh, now you want to kick me off? Of course you do, because you cannot handle the truth. You cannot handle someone who refuses to play your game. Fine, I do not need this. I do not need you. I do not need any of this." End quote. She ripped off her microphone and threw it on the floor. The sound of it hitting the ground echoed through the studio. Susanna stood up and said, quote, "I am not kicking you off. I am simply suggesting that if you cannot have a respectful conversation, then perhaps this is not the right time for this interview." End quote. But Meghan was already walking off the set. She turned around one last time and said, quote, "You people are all the same. You build people up just so you can tear them down. Well, I will not be your victim anymore." End quote. And then she was gone. She stormed off the set, walked through the studio doors, and disappeared. The cameras were still rolling. Susanna stood there for a moment, collecting herself. Then she sat back down, looked directly into the camera, and said, quote, "Well, that was certainly unexpected. We invited our guest here today to have an open and honest conversation. Unfortunately, she chose to make personal attacks rather than engage in a productive dialogue. We respect everyone's right to share their perspective, but we also expect our guests to treat our team with respect." End quote. Susanna then addressed the viewers at home. She said, quote, "I want to apologize to those of you watching at home who tuned in expecting a thoughtful discussion. We always strive to have meaningful conversations on this show, even when the topics are difficult or controversial. What you just witnessed was not what we had planned, but it is what happened. We will not edit this footage or pretend it did not occur. We believe in transparency and honesty." End quote. The show cut to a commercial break. Behind the scenes, the entire production team was in chaos. Nobody knew what to do. Nobody knew how to process what had just happened. The producers were on their phones, calling executives, trying to figure out how to handle the situation. The other hosts were standing around, discussing what they had just witnessed. Everyone agreed on one thing. They had never seen anything like this before. When the show came back from commercial, Susanna addressed the situation again. She said, quote, "We have just experienced something very unusual on live television. Our guest became upset during our interview and chose to leave. I want to be very clear about something. I have been doing this job for a long time. I have interviewed politicians, celebrities, activists, and everyday people. I have had many difficult conversations. I have asked many tough questions. But I have always tried to be fair, respectful, and professional." End quote. She continued, quote, "When someone comes on this show, we give them a platform to share their story. We ask questions because that is our job. We challenge statements when they need to be challenged. We seek clarity when things are unclear. But we do this with respect. We do this with professionalism. What we do not accept is personal attacks on our team members who are simply trying to do their jobs." End quote. Susanna took a moment and then said, quote, "I want to address something our guest said during the interview. She suggested that I was jealous of her. She suggested that my job is easy and that anyone could do it. I will not respond to those comments with anger or defensiveness. I will simply say this. I love my job. I am proud of my job. I work hard every single day to inform the public, to ask important questions, and to hold powerful people accountable. That is what journalism is about." End quote. She went on, quote, "I do not need to defend my career or my character to anyone. The people who watch this show know who I am. They know what I stand for. They know that I treat everyone with respect, regardless of their background, their beliefs, or their status. I have interviewed royalty, and I have interviewed regular citizens. I have interviewed people I agree with and people I disagree with, and I have always done so with fairness and integrity." End quote. The other hosts on the show rallied around Susanna. They spoke about how professional she had been during the entire situation. They talked about how she had remained calm even when she was being personally attacked. They praised her for not stooping to the same level. They pointed out that she had given their guest multiple opportunities to have a civil conversation, and that guest had chosen to attack instead of engage. One of the other hosts said, quote, "What we just witnessed was someone who came onto this show with an agenda. She did not come here to have a conversation. She came here to create a scene. She came here to play the victim. And when Susanna asked her legitimate questions, questions that any journalist would ask, she could not handle it." So she lashed out. She made it personal, and then she ran away, end quote. Another host added, quote, I have worked with Susanna for years. I have seen her interview some of the most powerful and controversial people in the world. She has been yelled at before. She has been criticized before. She has been challenged before. But she has never wavered. She has never compromised her principles. She has never let someone bully her into backing down from asking important questions. That is what makes her an excellent journalist, end quote. The conversation on the show continued for several more minutes. The hosts discussed the importance of free speech and open dialogue. They talked about how democracy depends on people being willing to have difficult conversations. They emphasized that asking tough questions is not the same as attacking someone. They explained that journalism requires holding people accountable, especially when those people have influence and power. Susanna summed it up by saying, quote, if you are a public figure, if you make public statements, if you use your platform to influence millions of people, then you have to be willing to answer questions about those statements. You have to be willing to defend your positions. You have to be willing to engage with people who might disagree with you. That is part of being in the public eye. You do not get to have it both ways. You do not get to demand attention and then refuse accountability, end quote. Throughout the rest of the show, viewers kept calling in and sending messages. The response was overwhelming. Hundreds of people reached out to express their support for Susanna. They praised her professionalism. They thanked her for staying calm. They agreed that she had been treated unfairly. Many viewers said they had lost respect for the guest after watching her behavior. They said it was entitled and disrespectful. They said it showed a complete lack of self-awareness. One viewer wrote in saying, quote, I tuned in expecting to hear an interesting conversation. Instead, I watched someone throw a tantrum because they did not like being asked basic questions. Susanna was nothing but professional, and the guest made a fool of herself, end quote. Another viewer said, quote, as someone who works in media, I can say that Susanna handled that situation perfectly. She stayed calm, she remained professional, and she did not take the bait. That is what real journalism looks like, end quote. A third viewer commented, quote, the guest came on that show with a chip on her shoulder. She was looking for a fight. She wanted to be able to say that she was attacked and victimized. But Susanna did not give her that. Susanna was fair and respectful, so the guest had to manufacture the drama herself, and it backfired spectacularly, end quote. The incident became the talk of the morning. Social media exploded with reactions. People were sharing clips of the interview. They were discussing what had happened. They were debating who was in the right and who was in the wrong. But the overwhelming consensus was clear. Susanna had conducted herself with grace and professionalism, while her guest had come across as entitled, defensive, and unable to handle even the most basic questioning. What made this moment so shocking was not just the outburst itself, but the complete lack of self-control. Here was someone who had been given a platform to share her perspective, to tell her story, to make her case to millions of viewers. And instead of using that opportunity wisely, she squandered it. She let her emotions take over. She made personal attacks. She refused to engage in good faith. And then she stormed off, leaving everyone stunned. In the world of television, things can go wrong. Interviews can get tense. Disagreements can happen. But what separates a professional from an amateur is how you handle those moments. Susanna showed why she has been successful in her career for so many years. She stayed calm under pressure. She did not let emotions dictate her actions. She maintained her integrity even when she was being personally attacked. The guest, on the other hand, showed the opposite. She showed that she could not handle criticism. She showed that she viewed any questioning as an attack. She showed that she was more interested in creating drama than in having a meaningful conversation. And most importantly, she showed that she believed the rules that apply to everyone else should not apply to her. This was supposed to be an interview, a conversation, an exchange of ideas, but it turned into something else entirely. It turned into a display of entitlement and a refusal to be held accountable. It turned into a lesson about what happens when someone is so used to being treated with kid gloves that they cannot handle even the most basic scrutiny. The moment that stood out the most was when the guest said that Susanna was just a news reader and that anyone could do her job. That single comment revealed so much. It revealed a deep disrespect for journalism. It revealed a lack of understanding about what reporters actually do. It revealed an attitude that the only people who matter are those with fame and influence, and that everyone else is beneath them. Journalists are not just news readers. They are investigators. They are fact checkers. They are question askers. They hold powerful people accountable. They shine light on important issues. They give voice to those who would otherwise go unheard. It is a difficult job that requires skill, dedication, and integrity. To dismiss it so casually shows a profound ignorance and arrogance. As the show wrapped up that morning, Susanna gave one final statement. She said, quote, "Today did not go as planned, but life rarely does. What matters is how we respond when things do not go as expected. Do we lash out? Do we blame others? Do we run away? Or do we stay calm, stay professional, and stay true to our values? I hope I showed today that I choose the latter. I will always choose the latter." End quote. And with that, the show ended. The credits rolled, the cameras turned off. But the impact of what had happened that morning would last much longer. It became one of those television moments that people would talk about for years to come, not because it was planned, not because it was scripted, but because it was raw, real, and revealing. It revealed the character of everyone involved. It revealed who could handle pressure and who could not. It revealed who was professional and who was not. It revealed who was interested in honest dialogue and who was only interested in being right. And most importantly, it revealed the difference between someone who uses their platform responsibly and someone who abuses it. In those 38 seconds when everything fell apart, when the mask slipped and the truth came out, viewers saw exactly who they were dealing with. They saw a host who remained calm, professional, and respectful even under attack. And they saw a guest who could not handle basic questions, who made personal attacks, and who ultimately proved every criticism that had ever been leveled against her. It was a moment that defined both of them. And the verdict was clear. Let us go back to the beginning and understand what led to this moment. The interview had been scheduled weeks in advance. The guest had agreed to come on the show. She knew what kind of program Good Morning Britain was. She knew that Susanna Reid was a serious journalist who asked tough questions. This was not supposed to be a friendly chat. This was supposed to be a real interview where real topics would be discussed. The production team had sent over the general topics they wanted to cover. Nothing was hidden. Nothing was a surprise. The guest had time to prepare. She had time to think about her answers. She had time to gather her thoughts. But instead of preparing for a substantive conversation, it seems like she prepared for a fight. She came in with her defenses up. She came in assuming she would be attacked. And that assumption became a self-fulfilling prophecy. When Susanna asked about the different perspectives that existed regarding her public statements, it was not an attack. It was an acknowledgement of reality. In any public controversy, there are multiple sides. There are people who agree and people who disagree. There are people who believe one version of events and people who believe another. A good journalist does not take sides. A good journalist asks questions that allow the guest to address all of these perspectives. But the guest did not see it that way. She saw any question that was not completely supportive as an attack. She saw any attempt to present alternative viewpoints as bias. She wanted Susanna to simply nod along and agree with everything she said. That is not journalism. That is propaganda. And Susanna was not willing to do that. She was not willing to compromise her integrity for the sake of making her guests comfortable. The moment when the guest stood up and started pointing at Susanna was particularly shocking. In all of Susanna's years of broadcasting, she had never had a guest physically stand up and point at her in anger during an interview. It was aggressive. It was intimidating. It was meant to make Susanna back down. But Susanna did not back down. She stayed in her seat. She kept her voice calm. She maintained her professionalism. Some people might wonder why Susanna did not end the interview sooner. Why did she let it go on as long as it did? The answer is simple. Susanna gave her guest every possible opportunity to course correct. Every time the guest made an accusation, Susanna calmly addressed it. Every time the guest raised her voice, Susanna lowered hers. She was hoping that the guest would realize what she was doing and pull back. She was hoping for a moment of clarity that never came. When the guest accused Susanna of being jealous, you could see the shock on the faces of everyone in the studio. The camera operators, the producers, the other hosts. Everyone knew that accusation was absurd. Susanna Reid has had an incredibly successful career. She has won awards. She has interviewed prime ministers and presidents. She has covered major world events. She has the respect of her peers and her audience. The idea that she would be jealous of anyone, let alone this guest, was laughable. But more than that, the accusation revealed something about the guest's mindset. It showed that she views everything through the lens of jealousy and competition. She assumes that anyone who questions her must be jealous of her. Anyone who challenges her must want what she has. It is a deeply narcissistic worldview. It prevents any real self-reflection. It makes it impossible to accept criticism or learn from mistakes. The comment about Susanna being just a newsreader who reads words off a teleprompter was equally revealing. First of all, it showed a complete misunderstanding of what television journalism involves. Yes, there are teleprompters, but journalists do not just read. They write, they research, they investigate, they interview, they make split-second decisions about what questions to ask and how to follow up. It is a skill that takes years to develop. Second, the comment showed a dismissive attitude toward working people. The guest seemed to believe that only certain kinds of work have value, only certain kinds of people matter. Everyone else is replaceable. Everyone else is beneath consideration. It was an incredibly elitist and out-of-touch thing to say. And it did not go unnoticed by the viewers at home, many of whom work regular jobs and do not consider themselves replaceable or unimportant. When the guest ripped off her microphone and threw it on the floor, it was like watching a child throw a tantrum. It was not the behavior of a mature adult. It was not the behavior of someone who was interested in dialogue or understanding. It was the behavior of someone who was used to getting their way and could not handle being challenged. The microphone hitting the floor was not just a sound, it was a symbol of how quickly things had fallen apart. Susanna's response to all of this was masterful. She did not chase after the guest. She did not beg her to stay. She did not apologize for doing her job. Instead, she addressed the camera and explained to viewers what had happened. She took responsibility for her role as a journalist, while also making it clear that personal attacks would not be tolerated. She drew a line, and that line was important. After the guests left, the atmosphere in the studio was strange. On one hand, everyone was processing what had just happened. On the other hand, they had a show to continue. They had other segments to get through. They had a responsibility to their viewers. So they took a deep breath, regrouped, and moved forward. That professionalism extended to everyone on the team. The camera operators kept filming. The producers kept producing. The other hosts kept hosting. When they came back from commercial break, the decision was made to address what had happened rather than ignore it. This was the right decision. The viewers had seen the outburst. Pretending it did not happen would have been dishonest. Instead, Susanna and her colleagues talked about it openly. They discussed what journalism means. They discussed the importance of asking tough questions. They discussed the difference between being critical and being disrespectful. The support that came in from viewers was overwhelming. Phone calls, emails, social media messages. Thousands of people reached out to say that they supported Susanna. They appreciated her professionalism. They were disgusted by the guest's behavior. Many people said they had been on the fence about the guest before this interview, but now they had made up their minds. The guest had shown her true colors, and those colors were not pretty. Some of the messages were from people who worked in media themselves. They talked about how difficult it is to conduct interviews with hostile guests. They praised Susanna for keeping her cool. They said that they had been in similar situations and knew how hard it was not to react. They understood that what Susanna had done required tremendous self-control and professionalism. Other messages came from regular viewers who just wanted to express their frustration with entitled behavior. They talked about how they work hard every day at their jobs. They deal with difficult people. They handle stress and pressure, and they do it without throwing tantrums or making personal attacks. They wondered why someone with so much privilege could not do the same. They wondered why someone who had been given such an incredible platform could not use it more wisely. The incident also sparked a larger conversation about accountability. In recent years, there's been a trend of public figures avoiding tough questions. They give interviews only to friendly outlets. They surround themselves with people who agree with them. They shut down any criticism by claiming they're being attacked or victimized. This interview was a perfect example of that trend. And it was a perfect example of why that trend is so dangerous. Democracy depends on accountability. It depends on people in positions of influence being willing to answer questions. It depends on journalists being able to do their jobs without fear of personal attacks. When someone refuses to be held accountable, when they lash out at anyone who dares to question them, they are not standing up for themselves. They are undermining the very foundations of a free society. Susanna understood this. That is why she kept asking questions even when her guests became hostile. That is why she did not back down. That is why she maintained her professionalism even when it would have been easier to just end the interview and move on. She understood that her role as a journalist was bigger than just this one interview. It was about setting a standard. It was about showing that tough questions are not attacks. It was about demonstrating that respect goes both ways. The guest, unfortunately, did not understand this. She saw the interview as a battle to be won rather than a conversation to be had. She saw Susanna as an enemy rather than a professional doing her job. She saw questions as attacks rather than opportunities to clarify and explain. And because of that mindset, she lost. She lost the interview. She lost the respect of viewers. And she lost any credibility she might have had. What makes this story so compelling is not just the drama of the moment. It is what the moment revealed. It revealed character. It revealed values. It revealed how people behave when they are under pressure. Some people rise to the occasion. They stay calm. They stay professional. They stay true to their principles. Other people crumble. They lash out. They make excuses. They blame everyone but themselves. So, when we look back at this moment, when we remember those 38 seconds when everything fell apart, we should remember it not just as a piece of dramatic television. We should remember it as a lesson about professionalism, a lesson about accountability, a lesson about what happens when entitlement meets journalism, and a lesson about the difference between people who can handle pressure and people who cannot. That is what made this moment unforgettable.